ambassador and before Toy Story. So however much they wanted to echo or refer or take with them into their film life, leave it to other people to discuss. But I didn't inherit any of that from Disney or Lasseter. It was something that we did together.
Joe was working with John on the early version.
Yes, Joe and Brian.
Joe and I, yeah.
That's right. So I remember
seeing
the presentation years ago.
And I celebrated Joe and Brian coming in and continuing to work, but we just worked on a new version of the story. But yes, Joe was a connective tissue that after he came and worked with us, and my first thing was 4 weeks, and I have the original schedule that we wrote up. The first 4 weeks was Joe and me in a room with index cards to work on story for 4 weeks to get all this new stuff set up. Brian was just such a contributor. I added him to the story by list. And also the producers were just going to have me as sole writer. And I just said, I feel like Joe has contributed so much that I must put him in as co-writer. So, but it just grew out of that fresh endeavor. And yes, then Joe became, after having gone through that, he went to Pixar, and I'm sure continued to be a similar influence with them. He's just always magical.
I think having worked on the earlier version of Toaster at Disney with Joe and John originally, I should take this stuff while I'm talking. John originally wanted to make Toaster with computer graphics.
Yeah.
It was so early on in computer graphics that it was certainly not going to be possible to do at that point, but that was sort of John Lasseter's goal with it. And so I think, my interpretation of why there are a lot of similarities in Toy Story is that John didn't get to do them on Brave Little Toaster, so when he got Toy Story, it was his kind of wish fulfillment to do some of the things he wanted to do on Brave Little Toaster in Toy Story. So I think that's where some of that goes.
I have a follow-up question to that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one quick thought. It does seem like Lampy looks and moves a lot like Luxo.
That's true.
Well, Lampy was pre-Luxo. So,
Obviously, yeah.
So
And Rebecca had a lot to do with how Lampy moves. She did.
So you should be getting royalties off of Luxo.
Yeah. I write a letter.
Strongly worded.
Yeah, you're a little bit. You're in the logo.
I think some of that you can probably chalk up to, if you have this lamp shape and you're an animator and you're trying to figure out how to design a locomotion for this particular shape.
Mm-hmm.
Two animators will likely come to similar conclusions.
Yeah.
So that's more what I would chalk up the similarity between those two characters.
Yeah, it's just occasionally I hear something like, well, they'll talk about the junkyard finale and the toaster throwing its stuff in. And as I was saying, that was not the finale in the original story. So it's not like that's how he would have done the finale. This is how I did the finale. It's like, no, there was a different finale. It was a whole altogether different thing. But it was really interesting, the Worthless, people have talked, and David talked about the song Worthless and just the whole trash compactor thing that constituted the finale. It was interesting that Van Dyke Parks, when he was collaborating on songs, it was interesting that people have really connected with that as being a sort of a powerful piece with each character singing about its imminent demise and it gets crushed and everything. But that almost didn't happen. There was a song that came back to me. It was the only one of Van Dyke's that I went to Tom Willite and said, I can't use this. It was sort of a love ballad, and it was intended to sort of be, while they're in the junkyard and with Master's not seeing them, it's kind of a wistful love ballad kind of thing that plays during that. And actually, and I won't name the person because I don't want them to get in trouble, but I had somebody come back from a party and tell me that they had overheard a discussion where he was telling them, yeah, I'm working with this young director and I'm doing this cool ballad I've always wanted to do, and So I'm happy I get to do my love ballad, and he'll think it's for the movie, and no one's the wiser. And so I went to Tom and just said, this doesn't fulfill the story function. And I've said yes to everything else from him, and I've loved collaborating with him. This one's really off the mark, A, when I listen to it, and B, I've heard the story to back up that this is sort of a sidebar effort, not really an effort for the film. So Tom said, okay, I get it. So we went back to Van Dyke, and I was able to tell him, I really need something that is inside of our story, driving this thing, not sort of an overlay of wistfulness of the ships that pass in the night or whatever. And he nailed it. He just nailed it with Worthless. And it just was, I don't know if he felt extra juice because it was like, how dare you say no to something? I'm gonna get a great big yes out of you next time. But it was intriguing to me that song that so many people now cite that as something that is powerful and unusual, and it was great that sort of came out of that him after I had said no to the softer thing, and he just went dynamic after that, and it was great. And it was so fun to work with. Actually, Ollie Johnson's son was part of an audio team that was doing early experiments before digital was a thing, to do sound effects, music, and morphing audio. And so they did the trash compactor sounds that were kind of musical that became the percussion bed for that song. So I was working with Ollie Johnson's son doing audio crafting for not only the Meadow musical sounds, but the trash compactor stuff. And then David and Van Dyke obviously for the songwriting, and then David Newman for the arrangement of all of that, and making all the sound fit together as one big performance. It's awesome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Being a smaller independent film, I was wondering if there was any feedback from the studio that you pushed back on and kept your vision on. Was there anything that they were trying to change? Any suggestions? And you're like, nope, this is the movie I want to make.
There was no studio involvement, thankfully. It was just Tom Wilhite had taken it away from the studio, and so I was dealing directly with them. And Tom had given me that promise of creative freedom going into it, and he really stuck to it. There was one crisis moment though, where it was not, I didn't have to deal with notes coming from him or whatever. But word came to me from my editor, who had spent 6 months with him in the US, and then had gone to Taiwan for 6 months, and then came back and did 6 months of finishing. And word came to me when we were pretty deep into it that Don Ernst, who, bless his heart, just passed away recently within the last week. He was my editor. And he said, you have multiple producers. A couple of them are in my editing room trying to chop off the beginning of the movie. They want to start at the waterfall. They don't care about any of the stuff before the waterfall. They just want to start with an action movie. So I flew back to the US, to LA, to confront them over that. And that was a big waste of time and money to go take a detour during an intense schedule production. And then went back, and then also went back for retakes after that. But that was an intense thing. But it was not a traditional, there was no like committee giving notes. There was just a couple rogue producers trying to convince my editor to do like a mutiny. But Tom was the point person. He was the first person that invited me, and he knew I had been really starving to do something creative, and we'd been working together at the studio. And then Brad Bird and I had spent 5 years trying to get The Spirit off the ground, Will Eisner's The Spirit, as an animated feature, with Gary Kurtz, who was the producer of Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back at the time, as our producer. And we all were dedicated to that and just saw it as a radical thing. And it was going to be the first digitally inked and painted film back in '82. I was just coming off of Tron and was pushing to be the first ones to break through on that before Disney and stuff. But a lot of that did not come to pass. Ultimately, after 5 years, finally we decided, okay, we're gonna have to hit the pause button, come back later if there's funding, but for now, go find something else. And as soon as I had resigned from that situation with Gary, with all good feeling, said, look, if we get this script going, I'm back in a heartbeat. But as soon as I stepped away, Will Height was the one who called me and had me down in LA like 3 days later, and just said, I have this task, and I know you've been starving to do a film, and you spent 5 years trying to get this one off the ground. Well, even though I have very little money to give you, I can give you the creative freedom you've been starving for, and I'll protect you. And he really did.
I think the other thing, well, the other half of Tom Wilhite was teamed up with, it was with Donald Kushner, and their company, they were making Divorce Court. So, and First and 10, and like those kind of shows. I think they had been peripherally involved in some animated stuff, but they really didn't know. I mean, it was obvious to all of us because none of us had done the jobs we were hired to do ever before. So anybody who knew what they were doing would never have let us do it. and so that was the kind of interesting thing. Like at one point, just as an example, because the charcoal sketches are over there that I had done early on. One of the executive producers, who shall remain nameless, came into my room and started yelling at me, looking at those drawings. He's going, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I'm going, what are you yelling at me for? He goes, "We're not making this movie in black and white." So that's kind of the level we were dealing at. But they really didn't come around very much. And I think in a way for all of us working on it, it was kind of like, if you want to go get in shape and you go to like a boot camp and they work the hell out of you, and then you come out and you're all buff. Toaster was kind of like that for us. And I think the proof is in the pudding. You look at all the people that were on it, and everybody went on to be, lead something somewhere, either directing or, for me, art directing, pictures at bigger studios and things like that. So it really was kind of like that for us. But if anybody had known what we didn't know, we would have never been allowed to do it.
Well, we didn't know what we didn't know.
It's
I don't know how we got away with it.
Toaster is a great example of why, if you want to work in maybe all industries, but especially in Hollywood, the best place to be is always on the periphery, because they leave you alone. Yes. They don't bother with you because you're not important, and you're not a star, and you're not any of all this other kinds of things, and you can get away with a lot of stuff that you never get away with anyplace else.
Yep, and I've always loved sort of to try to find boutique, smaller size situations that kind of addicted me to that thing. So,
yeah, me too.
On Toaster, there was so much learning. I mean, you had to produce, but it's like learning, producing, teaching, learning, producing, teaching. It was this cycle, and it was all happening so fast and condensed. But coming out of Toaster, anything I had worked on to animate or whatever job I was doing on that film, but specifically with animation, I could do it so quickly. Much quicker than I could before, and I could just zero in on the scene and know exactly what had to be done and how long it was going to take, and it just, everything was rapid, and I was very much appreciated by the directors or producers to say thank you for producing, and we're paying you money and you're giving us the work that we need. So anyway, and I think, Steve, you felt that way too, that you could go into a production and just glide through, rather than...
You just do it, and that's what it happened on Toaster. You do it.
Yeah,
it's like,
but you take that with you wherever else you go.
Well, because at a certain point, you have to let go of your fear.
Yes.
Because you don't have time to be afraid.
Well, when
that was a big thing. I know sometimes I would get very self-conscious about what I was going to draw, but as soon as you put that huge deadline and just go, you have to have so much done. You can't worry about each drawing. Just go. And it was so freeing. And I remember Peter Schneider and Jeffrey Katzenberg calling me in after Toaster to ask me how we did it, like how much, because they were astonished by this tiny budget and how much our group accomplished, and how much quality footage came out per day, even though we weren't competing directly with their style at all, but they were just asking how. And so I was trying to explain, it's like when you're out of that nitpicky environment where people are poking and prodding and testing and screening 1,000 times and changing things and having different opinions, and it's just a small boutique team and everybody has an eye on the prize, and we're working together and collaborating and plussing each other's work. It can happen, and I think it's also critical in this team. I look around at all of you. Every one of you contributed individually. And I think that's something that's hard for big studios to understand. They go, we need this many animators of this type, we need this many assistants, we need this many, and I'm like, no, we need Rebecca, and we need Daryl, we need Steve, we need Kirk, we need Deanna. It's like, it's not just fill in a slot with a type of person and you get the job done. You can fill in those same slots with all different kind of people and get very different results. So hand-picking your team individually is a real plus. And I'm not sure that big studio thinking, I'm not sure if they fully grasp that, but anybody that's worked on small teams, I'm sure you get that.
Well, in the big features, I've worked on some of the bigger features, and they'll work things to death. Where you do it, and okay, first time around you didn't get something right. Second time, okay, you fix that. But after 3 or 4 jabs at it, you got it. You know when you've got it, and then they just continue to. There's somebody up this. There's always the brain trust. They literally call it the brain trust, and it goes from the director to some mysterious brain trust that when you're a board artist, you don't ever need the brain trust, and they just throw everything out, and it becomes this sort of creative taffy pull.
Well, and something that I think is a real plague with things taking as long as they do is, and this is hard to do even when you're doing something fast, but really hard when things take so many years, is when an idea is fresh, you all feel it, and then you have to work hard to get it done. So you're going to see that same joke 500 times. Sure. And like by the 300th time, you're like, it's not quite as funny. And by the end, you're like, what a boring, let's find another joke. And it's like, and now you start fiddling and you're finding another joke because you don't think it's funny anymore. And you go, you know what, the first one really did fit way better, but you don't have that perspective anymore. So, I've always, thankfully, I think I'm the kind of person that can listen. If I enjoy something the first time, when I listen to the 800th time, I still feel that first tickle of like, yeah, it's still fun. Still works. Instead of going, oh, now I'm bored, let's do something else. Then it's change for change's sake. It's not change for plussing it.
Right.
But it's also good to be open that even though you've got your eye on the prize and you want to stay on target, to be open that sometimes something will come along where you go, it actually will plus it. If I'm honest with myself, that pluses it. So like, be ready to welcome that too. So. Deanna, would you be up for a cold read on something I put on the screen?
the city of light. Wait, what?
Would you be up for a cold read of something
sure.
I put on the screen? Because I just think out of your voice it would be great. This just a preamble. And you can position your chair in a better position to see it if you want. I'm just going to end with this little thing. It's a little hint. I put a website up called Reflections of a Toaster several years ago. I was just musing about if the characters were going on with another adventure. I devised a theme around home being an important thing. And this is just the last 2 pages of a musing I did with the characters. They're at night on this journey. They're on their next adventure, and they've had this quiet moment around just as they're bedding down for the night, and Toaster's voice reading this would be really cool. It's just 2 pages.
Oh, the whole thing? Okay.
Yeah.
It was a magic moment, and a moment in which all eyes shifted from this unexpected symbol of home to the one who was leading them home now, Toaster. They were looking to Toaster for warmth, and maybe for a reflection of their own feelings. Toaster gave the simplest but deepest answer of all. Home is the only place in the whole world where you can see every member of the family reflected in your chrome at the same time. If that happens at least once a day, you know everything is good. Everyone agreed with this wholeheartedly, and Laptop added, I'm taking this all down, please go on. Toaster paused, thinking itself mostly done, then glancing round at its tender dependents, felt a phantom glow in its coils, even though they weren't plugged in. And happy for its companions, and for us, a few more warm and toasty thoughts popped up. Some say that home is a thing of the past, the reflection of a lost dream. But I believe that it will always be clear to us. Home means warmth, and warmth is my function. And so, to home I offer a toast. Wheat toast with butter and jam. Toast with butter and jam, everyone cheered. Outside, they heard the beaver slap its tail on the water again, spooked by their noise. They all burst out laughing, which soon turned into yawns, which soon turned into snores, except for Laptop, who was posting Toaster's last comments on its blog. Being months out of date, the computer was intent on making what could be its final posts meaningful, possibly even worthy of likes and shares. This entry, it thought, measured up. While it was spell checking and double checking that the thesaurus had been duly used for flourishes and flavor, the chirping of crickets and frogs echoed from beyond the stacked plastic igloo, and night fully fell. Signing off, Laptop was struck with a fundamentally chilling thought. Imagining a world with no home pages. What a horrid future that would be. They had to succeed. They had to save it. Home.
Yep. Anybody else has questions? I'm happy to continue, but it's kind of a nice bow on it.
We do have a question.
Yes.
One more question.
Last question.
Yes, last question. For the young, aspiring indie animators and filmmakers out there, they want tips, advice, how to do it. What do you?
Gosh, make sure that you're doing something you care about, and I think I've actually had this discussion with teams on all different kind of teams, in like theme park projects, independent live action film projects, tech teams. You know, sit down as a little group and you go, let's try to do our best work ever, and while we're doing it, let's think of 10 years looking back on what we're doing right now and make sure we're proud of it. Like if you kind of have that mindset going in for yourself and for teams around you, it really sets you on a different kind of path than if you're doing the checkbox of, you know, just will it be a certain thing that's popular right this week, or will it make X amount of money if I do this by next Tuesday or something. It's more of a, you know, a longer term value judgment you're making to try to do your best and have it be something you're proud of. So and that, you know, that then you dig into what you really care about, and usually what happens if you really care, other people will notice it. And you know, we had our teachers, you know, the 9 old men, that those of them that were there were a few of them still at their desk when I first went into my teens, and they would say that they went, you know, we didn't focus test something to find out if it would work. Like, we cared about it. And they said, if you love something, you have proof somebody does. If you don't, and you go, yeah, but tests show that somebody might love it, you don't really have proof of anything. But if you feel it in you, you have proof of one. So I can do that.
Jerry, one thing that you always did, and I'd say it to these young filmmakers, is that everything grew out of character.
Yeah.
And there was a story with a premise, and it grew out of character.
Yeah.
And we never tried to reach, with all due respect to all the great work that you did, which was so vital to the movie, but we never reached for the visual as an answer for the dramatic solution. It happened sometime, but it came out of the bedrock of character and understanding that. And then so much I noticed in some of my teaching exploits is that the young animators are always trying to reach for the visual, and there's no understanding of the backstory or the character or the premise or who they are. All that great stuff you said about how Jerry, said Lampy. What did you say? Lampy is. I'm a little tired right now.
He's a dim bulb.
Yeah.
He was that succinct.
It was that succinct.
Yeah, I got it.
And it's that kind of thing that I think young animators and story people really need to focus on, and you'll get to the visual.
Well, and you know what, Alex?
And it will become a marriage of the two.
And you're right. It will actually influence the visual.
Absolutely.
If you reach the emotional core first,
you have an
then
understanding
you'll know
of it.
how the visual should frame it.
Exactly.
If you do the frame first, it's like, how do you know what fits in it?
Exactly.
Otherwise,
you'd
you
be
have a
surprised
pretty.
at how much it's that way in the industry.
I know.
They're reaching for cool visuals, and executives will come in and say, "Oh, there's all these cool visuals. We must really have a great project here."
But they have an immature project. But then
right? We know what we're talking about.
But then they have an
there's nothing
immature
there.
project, right, Alex?
What's that?
It's an immature project if it relies on the visual first, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the visual's vital.
It's not fully formed.
Right. Exactly.
Because then they say, well, now we have to figure out what the story is. Now.
Yeah.
We know how it looks.
And we've been having immature stories probably for the last 2-3 years now, and things that just I don't see the breadth of life experience creating a thing broad enough to entertain enough people.
Well, I like what you're saying about life experience, because that's something that we were taught, and we definitely tried to do, is observe instead of just copying other people's work.
Yeah.
And the veterans would say that. I'm flattered that you checked out the original drawings from that scene I did in Pinocchio and flipped it, but please don't copy me. I wasn't copying another animator. I was looking at real life, and I was looking at friends, and when Wooly was going to animate the lightning for that scene, came outside of a bar, and he laid in the rain and was watching the lightning, and then the next day he was doing charcoal sketches of it. They would say, reach into your own life, your own experience, look around you, bring that into your work instead of bring other people's films into your films, bring life into your films.
Authenticity.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing. I'd like to ask everyone to help me thank these people. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone. We've got wine. You can stay and talk. We're going to shut down online.
Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone online.
Bye.
Bye. Cool, cool.
People come and go Jerry, I'm gonna take my mama home.
Hasta la vista. Hasta luego.
I hope I read that okay.
Bye.
It's actually very inspiring.